Space Traveler's Adventure on a Post-Apocalyptic Planet. Chapter 1. Introduction. The vast emptiness of space stretched out before Captain Zephyr Kane as he reclined in the pilot's chair of the stellar horizon. The ship, a marvel of engineering, hummed softly around him, its automated systems handling the complexities of interstellar travel with silent efficiency. Zephyr was the sole occupant of this technological wonder, embarking on a routine mission to chart the outer reaches of known space. As he gazed out at the star-speckled void, Zephyr couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at the sheer scale of the universe. He had left his home solar system weeks ago, the familiar constellations long since faded from view. Now, he was truly in uncharted territory, pushing the boundaries of human exploration. The ship's AI, Area, broke the silence. "Captain, we are approaching the coordinates for our next jump, preparing for faster-than-light travel." Zephyr nodded, more out of habit than necessity. "Proceed, Area. Let's see what's waiting for us on the other side." As the stellar horizon began to power up its FTL drive, Zephyr noticed something odd on the long-range sensors. A swirling mass of energy, unlike anything he had encountered before, was forming directly in their path. "Aria, what am I looking at?" Zephyr asked, leaning forward to study the readouts more closely. "Unknown phenomenon detected, Captain. Energy readings are off the charts. Recommend immediate course correction." But before Zephyr could respond, the swirling mass expanded rapidly, engulfing the stellar horizon in a tempest of light and energy. The ship shuddered violently, alarms blaring as systems began to overload. "Hold on!" Zephyr shouted, gripping his seat as the ship spun out of control. The last thing he saw before losing consciousness was a blinding flash of light that seemed to tear the very fabric of space around them. When Zephyr finally came to, the gentle hum of the ship's systems gradually pulling him back to awareness, he found himself slumped in his chair. The view screen before him showed an unfamiliar starscape, with constellations he didn't recognize. "Aria," he croaked, his throat dry. "Status report." The AI's voice came through, tinged with an unusual note of uncertainty. "Captain, I'm afraid I have some concerning news. We appear to have been transported to an unknown region of space. Our star charts do not match any known configurations in our database. Furthermore, I am unable to establish our coordinates relative to our point of origin." Zephyr felt a chill run down his spine as the full implications of Aria's words sank in. They were lost, adrift in an unknown part of the universe, with no way to chart a course back home. As he processed this unsettling information, Aria spoke again. "Captain, I have detected a habitable planet in a nearby solar system. However, the readings are unusual. Would you like me to set a course?" Zephyr took a deep breath, steeling himself for whatever challenges lay ahead. "Yes, Aria. Take us in. It looks like we've got a mystery to solve." The stellar horizon's engines hummed to life, propelling the ship towards the unknown planet. As they drew closer, Zephyr couldn't shake the feeling that this unexpected detour was about to change his life in ways he could never have imagined. Chapter 2. Arrival on the Unknown Planet. As the stellar horizon approached the mysterious planet, Zephyr leaned forward in his chair, eyes fixed on the view screen. The world before him was a swirl of muted colors. Grays, browns, and sickly greens dominated the landscape, with occasional flashes of unnatural light piercing through the thick cloud cover. "Aria, run a full spectral analysis," Zephyr commanded, his brow furrowed in concentration. The AI's response came swiftly. "Analysis complete, Captain. The planet's atmosphere is oxygen-rich, capable of supporting human life. However, I'm detecting high levels of pollutants and radioactive particles. There are also large areas emitting radiation signatures consistent with the aftermath of nuclear detonations. Zephyr's heart sank. Whatever civilization had existed on this world had clearly suffered a catastrophic event. Any signs of life, Area? Inconclusive, Captain. There are anomalous heat signatures and movement patterns on the surface, but I cannot confirm the nature of these readings without closer inspection. Making a decision, Zephyr began to input commands into the ship's console. All right, we're going in for a closer look. Engage stealth systems and begin atmospheric entry. The stellar horizon descended through the planet's turbulent atmosphere, the ship's advanced shielding protecting it from the corrosive elements. As they broke through the cloud cover, Zephyr gasped at the scene below. Sprawling cities lay in ruins, their once towering skyscrapers now skeletal remains reaching forlornly towards the sky. Vast swathes of land were scarred and barren, while others were overgrown with mutated vegetation. But most shocking of all were the shambling figures that moved through the desolate streets. "Aria, magnify Sector 3, Zephyr ordered, his voice barely above a whisper. The image zoomed in, revealing a horrifying sight. The figures were humanoid, but their movements were erratic and unnatural. Their flesh was discolored and decaying, eyes glazed over with a milky film. As Zephyr watched, one of the creatures lunged at a small animal, tearing into it with inhuman ferocity. "My God!" Zephyr muttered. "They're zombies? How is this possible?" Aria's cool voice cut through his shock. "Captain, I'm detecting a small enclave of normal human life signs approximately 20 kilometers from our current position. The area appears to be fortified against the hostile entities we've observed." Zephyr took a deep breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead. "Set us down near that enclave, Aria, but keep our defenses at maximum. We don't know what kind of welcome we'll receive." As the stellar horizon descended towards a clearing near the human settlement, Zephyr couldn't help but feel a mix of trepidation and excitement. He had come seeking new frontiers, but this was far beyond anything he had ever imagined. The ship touched down softly, kicking up a cloud of dust. Zephyr donned his exosuit, complete with air filtration and radiation shielding. As he stood before the airlock, he turned to address the ship's AI one last time. "Aria, keep all systems on alert. If anything goes wrong, I'll need a quick extraction." "Understood, Captain. Please exercise extreme caution. My analysis suggests that the hostile entities are most active during daylight hours. It is currently mid-morning local time." With a nod, Zephyr activated the airlock. As the door hissed open, he stepped out onto the alien soil, the first human from his world to set foot on this ravaged planet. The air was thick and acrid, and an eerie silence hung over the landscape, broken only by the occasional distant moan that sent shivers down his spine. Zephyr activated his suit's scanner, sweeping the area for immediate threats. Finding none, he began to make his way cautiously towards the human settlement. As he crested a small hill, he saw it, a hodgepodge of structures surrounded by a makeshift wall, showing signs of hasty but ingenious fortification. Suddenly, a warning flashed on his helmet's HUD. Movement detected, multiple hostile entities approaching from the east. Zephyr's hand went to his plasma pistol as he saw a group of the zombie-like creatures shambling towards him, their dead eyes fixed on their newfound prey. In that moment, Zephyr realized that his mission had changed dramatically. No longer was he just an explorer charting unknown space. Now, he was perhaps these people's only hope for survival, and his own ticket home. With determination setting his jaw, he raised his weapon and prepared to face the horrors of this new world. Chapter 3. First Encounters. Zephyr's plasma pistol hummed to life as the first of the zombies lurched towards him. With practiced precision, he fired, the energy bolt searing through the air and striking the creature squarely in the chest. It fell, twitching, but the others kept coming. "Arya," Zephyr spoke into his comm. "I could use some support here." The AI responded immediately. "Deploying defense drones, Captain." From the stellar horizon, a swarm of small, spherical drones emerged, zipping through the air toward Zephyr's position. They formed a protective circle around him, their built-in weapons firing in tandem with Zephyr's own shots. Within minutes, the immediate threat was neutralized. As the last zombie fell, Zephyr heard a commotion from the direction of the human settlement. A group of people, clad in mismatched armor and wielding an assortment of weapons, was approaching cautiously. "Hold your fire," Zephyr called out, raising his hands in a universal gesture of peace. "I'm alive, like you. I'm here to help." The group paused, weapons still raised. A woman stepped forward, her face partially obscured by a makeshift gas mask. "Who are you?" she demanded. "Where did you come from? And what are those things?" She gestured at the hovering drones. Zephyr took a deep breath. "My name is Zephyr Kane. I'm not from this world. I arrived here by accident in my spaceship." He pointed towards the stellar horizon. "Those are defense drones from my ship. They won't harm you." The woman's eyes widened in disbelief. She turned to her companions, speaking in hushed tones. After a moment of deliberation, she faced Zephyr again. "I'm Sarah. We've never met anyone from another world before. If you're telling the truth, maybe you can help us. But if this is some kind of trick—" She left the threat unspoken. Zephyr nodded. "I understand your caution. I'd be happy to explain everything, but perhaps we could do so somewhere safer. Those creatures might have friends." Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "Follow us, but your drones stay outside our walls." As they made their way to the settlement, Zephyr observed his surroundings more closely. The survivors had fortified an old shopping mall, using overturned vehicles and scavenged materials to create a formidable barrier. Inside the walls, he could see makeshift gardens and water collection systems. Once inside, Sarah led Zephyr to what appeared to be a former food court, now serving as a communal area. People stopped and stared as he passed, whispering among themselves. "All right, spaceman," Sarah said, removing her mask to reveal a face hardened by years of survival. "Start talking." Over the next few hours, Zephyr explained his origin and how he came to be on their planet. In turn, Sarah and the other survivors shared their own harrowing tale. "It started with the war," an older man named Marcus explained, his voice heavy with remembered sorrow. "A global conflict that escalated beyond anyone's control. When the nukes started flying, we thought that was the end." Sarah picked up the narrative. But the radiation and destruction were just the beginning. The losing side, in their final act of vengeance, released a bioweapon, a virus that brought the dead back to life, with an insatiable hunger for the living. Most of the world's population either died in the war or succumbed to the virus. Another survivor, a young man named Alex, added, "Those of us left have been fighting to survive ever since." Zephyr listened, horrified by the scale of the tragedy. "How long ago did this happen?" "Almost 10 years now," Sarah replied. "We've managed to carve out this safe haven, but the zombies are evolving, getting stronger. Each day is a struggle." As the survivors continued to share their story, Zephyr's mind raced with possibilities. His ship's advanced technology could be the key to not just survival, but perhaps even reclaiming this world from the zombie hordes. "I want to help," Zephyr said firmly, once the survivors had finished their tale. "My ship has technology that could turn the tide in your favor. Advanced weapons, medical equipment, even the capability to produce more." The survivors exchanged looks of hope and skepticism. Sarah leaned forward, her eyes intense. "If what you're saying is true, it could change everything. But why would you do this for us? You're not from our world. You owe us nothing." Zephyr met her gaze steadily. "Because it's the right thing to do. And because, for now at least, I'm as stuck here as you are. My ship can't get me home, not without knowing where home is in relation to here. So, if I'm going to be here, I want to make a difference." There was a moment of silence as the survivors processed his words. Then, slowly, Sarah extended her hand. "All right, Zephyr. We're willing to give this a shot. What's your plan?" As Zephyr shook her hand, he felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. These people were placing their trust, their very lives, in his hands. He couldn't let them down. "First," he said, his voice filled with determination, "we fortify this place. Then, we start taking back your world, one step at a time." The survivors nodded, a newfound hope visible in their eyes. As they began to discuss strategies and possibilities, Zephyr couldn't help but feel that his accidental arrival on this planet might just be the turning point in its history. The road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in decades, the future held a glimmer of hope for the people of this ravaged world. Chapter 4. Taking Leadership. In the days following his arrival, Zephyr worked tirelessly to gain the trust of the survivors and demonstrate the value of his advanced knowledge and technology. He began by addressing their most immediate concerns: security and resources. Using his ship's fabrication capabilities, Zephyr produced a series of advanced sensors that could detect zombie activity from a greater distance, giving the settlement crucial early warning of approaching hordes. He also introduced more efficient water purification systems and high-yield crop varieties that could thrive in the polluted soil. As the tangible benefits of Zephyr's assistance became apparent, the survivors began to look to him more and more for guidance. Sarah, recognizing the positive impact of his leadership, approached him one evening as he was tinkering with a makeshift communications array. "Zephyr," she said, her voice carrying a mix of respect and cautious optimism, "the Council has been talking. We think you should take charge of our long-term planning and defense strategies." Zephyr looked up from his work, surprised. "Are you sure? I'm still learning about your world, your situation." Sarah nodded firmly. "You've done more for us in a few days than we've managed in years. Your knowledge, your technology, it's what we need if we're going to do more than just survive. We need to start living again, maybe even take back what we've lost." Zephyr stood, wiping his hands on a rag as he considered Sarah's words. He knew that accepting this role would be a massive responsibility, one that would tie him to this planet and its people for the foreseeable future. But as he looked around at the hopeful faces of the survivors, he realized that he couldn't turn his back on them. "All right," he said finally, "I'll do it, but I'll need everyone's support and cooperation. We're in this together." Sarah smiled, relief evident on her face. "You'll have it. So, what's our first move, Chief?" Zephyr grinned at the new title. "First, we need to secure a larger perimeter. Then, we start taking the fight to the zombies." Over the next few weeks, Zephyr worked with the survivors to implement his plans. He divided the population into teams, each focused on a crucial aspect of their survival and eventual expansion. The defense team, led by Alex, worked with Zephyr to create a more robust fortification system. Using materials fabricated by the stellar horizon, they constructed a series of automated defense guns that could target and neutralize zombies with pinpoint accuracy. Marcus headed the resource team, applying Zephyr's advanced agricultural techniques to increase food production. They also began experimenting with ways to decontaminate larger areas of land, slowly expanding their viable farming territory. Sarah took charge of the newly formed exploration team. Armed with protective gear and weapons provided by Zephyr's ship, they began scouting beyond their immediate area, mapping the surrounding territory and searching for other potential survivors. Zephyr himself focused on adapting his ship's technology to their specific needs. He worked on creating more efficient power sources, improving their communication systems, and developing new weapons and defenses against the evolving zombie threat. As weeks turned into months, the changes in the settlement became increasingly evident. The once fragile community began to thrive. Food was more plentiful, defenses were stronger, and for the first time in years, the survivors began to think beyond mere day-to-day survival. However, challenges remained. The zombies, driven by an insatiable hunger, continued to test their defenses regularly. And as Sarah's exploration team pushed further out, they encountered new dangers, mutated wildlife, pockets of extreme radiation, and evidence that the zombies were indeed evolving, becoming faster and more aggressive. One evening, as Zephyr was reviewing the latest scout reports with Sarah and the other team leaders, a commotion outside caught their attention. Racing to the wall, they saw a massive horde of zombies approaching, larger and more organized than any they had seen before. As the settlement's alarms blared and defenders rushed to their positions, Zephyr realized that this would be the true test of everything they had built. He turned to his team, his face set with determination. "This is what we've been preparing for," he said, his voice steady and confident. "We're ready for this. Sarah, coordinate the ground defense. Alex, man the defense gun controls. Marcus, get all non-combatants to the secure bunkers." As the others rushed to their tasks, Zephyr tapped his communicator. "Aria, deploy all available drones. We're going to need everything we've got." Looking out at the approaching horde, Zephyr felt a mix of fear and resolve. This battle would determine whether their efforts had been enough, whether this fledgling community could truly stand against the horrors of this world. As the first waves of zombies crashed against their defenses, Zephyr steeled himself for the fight ahead. The true test of his leadership was about to begin. Chapter 5. Fortification and Defense. The zombie horde loomed on the horizon, a seething mass of decaying flesh and mindless hunger. Zephyr stood atop the wall, surveying the defenses he and the survivors had put in place over the past months. "Aria," Zephyr commanded, "initiate Defense Protocol Alpha." "Acknowledged, Captain," the AI responded. Activating all defensive systems. Around the perimeter of the settlement, advanced weaponry hummed to life. Automatic laser guns, their barrels gleaming in the dim light, swiveled to track the approaching threat. Behind them, larger railgun emplacements stood ready, designed to take down the more formidable mutated zombies that had begun to appear. Zephyr turned to Sarah, who was coordinating the ground troops. "How are we looking?" Sarah's face was grim but determined. "All civilians are in the bunkers. Defense teams are in position. We're as ready as we'll ever be." Nodding, Zephyr activated his comlink. "Alex, status on the drone swarms?" Alex's voice crackled through, tense but focused. "Drone swarms are ready, Zephyr. We've got eyes on the entire horde. They've never been this organized before." Zephyr had noticed it too. The zombies weren't just a mindless mob anymore. There was a crude sort of strategy to their approach. "They're evolving," he muttered, "adapting. We need to end this here and now." As the horde drew closer, Zephyr could make out different types of zombies. Some were the standard shamblers, slow but relentless. Others moved with frightening speed, darting between the slower ones. And behind them all, massive brutes lumbered forward, their mutated forms twisted into living, battering rams. "All units," Zephyr commanded, "prepare to engage. Remember your training. We can do this." The first wave of zombies broke against the outer defenses, like a tide of rotting flesh. Laser guns fired with precision, cutting down swathes of the creatures. The rail guns boomed, their hypervelocity rounds tearing through multiple targets with each shot. For a moment, it seemed like the defenses might be enough. But then the faster zombies reached the walls, climbing over the bodies of their fallen brethren. They were met with a hail of gunfire from the defenders, but some made it through, forcing the survivors into brutal hand-to-hand combat. Zephyr was in the thick of it, his plasma pistol firing non-stop. "Area!" he shouted over the din of battle. "Deploy the shock drones!" A new wave of drones shot out from the stellar horizon, diving into the mass of zombies. They detonated in brilliant flashes of electricity, stunning and destroying scores of the creatures. But the horde seemed endless. As night fell, the battle raged on. The defenders were tiring, and the zombies kept coming. Then a bone-chilling roar cut through the chaos. One of the brutes had reached the wall. "Concentrate fire on that brute," Zephyr ordered. But the creature seemed to shrug off the barrage, its mutated form resistant to their weapons. It slammed into the wall, and Zephyr felt the structure shudder beneath his feet. In that moment, Zephyr knew they needed something more. "Area," he said, his voice steady despite the dire situation. "Initiate Project Sunburst." "Warning," Arya responded. "Project Sunburst is untested and may have unforeseen consequences." "We're out of options," Zephyr replied. "Do it." From the top of the stellar horizon, a large device began to unfold. It looked like a massive satellite dish, but instead of receiving signals, it began to pulse with energy. The air crackled with building power. "Everyone, get down!" Zephyr shouted into his comm. A blinding flash lit up the night sky, followed by a wave of energy that swept over the battlefield. When Zephyr's vision cleared, he saw a scene of devastation. The zombies closest to the wall lay motionless, their reanimated nervous systems overloaded by the energy pulse. Further out, the creatures stumbled in confusion, their crude coordination disrupted. "Push them back," Zephyr ordered. "This is our chance." The defenders rallied, pressing their advantage. Turrets fired with renewed vigor, cutting down the disoriented zombies. The survivors, energized by this turn of the tide, fought with everything they had. As dawn broke, the last of the horde was finally repelled. The ground outside the walls was littered with fallen zombies, and the air was thick with the acrid smell of ozone and decay. But they had done it. They had survived. Zephyr leaned against the wall, exhausted but triumphant. Sarah approached, her face streaked with grime and blood, but her eyes shining with victory. "We did it," she said, her voice filled with awe. "I can't believe we actually did it." Zephyr nodded, allowing himself a small smile. "We did it, but this is just the beginning. Now we need to push out, reclaim more territory. We can't just defend anymore. It's time to take the fight to them." As the survivors began the process of cleaning up and repairing their defenses, Zephyr's mind was already racing with new plans. The zombies were evolving, becoming smarter and stronger. They needed to adapt faster, push harder. He looked out at the ravaged landscape beyond the walls. Somewhere out there were more survivors, more people they could save. The bioweapon that had created this nightmare was long gone, its creators victims of their own vengeance. But its effects lingered on, a relentless plague that threatened to consume what remained of humanity. Zephyr made a silent vow. He would help these people reclaim their world, not by seeking a non-existent cure, but by carving out ever larger safe zones, by rescuing other survivors, and by pushing back the tide of undead that threatened to overwhelm them all. It would be a long, grueling process, but looking at the determined faces around him, Zephyr knew it was possible. Sarah approached, her expression a mix of exhaustion and hope. "What's next, Zephyr? We've defended our home, but now we expand," Zephyr finished for her. "We can't just survive anymore, Sarah. It's time we started living again. We'll push outward, reclaim more territory, find more survivors, and we'll keep innovating, keep adapting. Those zombies might be evolving, but so are we." Sarah nodded, a small smile forming on her lips. "I like the sound of that. So, what's the first step?" Zephyr grinned, his mind already formulating new plans. "First, we rest and recover. Then, we start building. I've got some ideas for multi-use robots that could change the game entirely." As the sun rose higher, casting its light over the battered but unbroken community, Zephyr felt a renewed sense of purpose. The battle was won, but the war for survival, for reclamation, was just beginning. And he was determined to see it through, no matter what challenges lay ahead. Chapter 6. Expansion and Reconstruction. In the weeks following the massive zombie attack, Zephyr threw himself into his most ambitious project yet. The settlement buzzed with activity as he worked tirelessly in a makeshift lab, converting part of the stellar horizon into a high-tech workshop. "Aria!" Zephyr called out, his voice echoing in the cluttered space. "Run Simulation 47B for the multi-use robot prototype." The AI's voice responded promptly. "Simulation complete, Captain. Results show a 92% success rate in variable terrain navigation and a 87% efficiency in task completion across all programmed functions." Zephyr nodded, satisfaction evident on his face. "That's what I like to hear. Prepare for first physical prototype construction." As the ship's fabrication systems whirred to life, Sarah entered the lab, her eyes widening at the holographic displays showing intricate robot designs. "So, this is what you've been working on," she said, a mix of awe and curiosity in her voice. "Care to give me the rundown?" Zephyr's face lit up with enthusiasm. "These are going to change everything, Sarah. Multi-use robots, capable of adapting to various tasks. They can clear rubble, construct buildings, farm, and even engage in combat when necessary." He gestured to different parts of the holographic model. "See here? Advanced AI allows them to make decisions on the fly. They're equipped with modular tool sets that can be swapped out depending on the task at hand. And this? A self-repairing nanomesh exoskeleton. They're tough, adaptable, and tireless." And Sarah whistled, impressed. "And you're sure we can produce these?" "With the Stellar Horizon's fabrication capabilities, yes," Zephyr confirmed. "It'll take time to build up a significant number, but each one we deploy will dramatically increase our efficiency and safety." Over the next month, Zephyr and his team worked around the clock to produce and test the first batch of robots. When they were finally ready for deployment, the entire settlement gathered to watch. Zephyr stood before the crowd, a sense of anticipation in the air. "Today," he began, his voice carrying across the attentive faces, "we take our first major step towards reclaiming your world. These robots are more than just machines. They're the embodiment of our hope, our determination to not just survive, but to thrive." With a nod to Alex, who manned the control station, the first robot whirred to life. It was roughly humanoid in shape, standing about 7 feet tall, its metallic surface gleaming in the sunlight. As the crowd watched in awe, the robot began to demonstrate its capabilities. It effortlessly lifted heavy debris, its arms reconfiguring to form construction tools. Then, with incredible speed and precision, it assembled a small structure, demonstrating its building capabilities. Finally, its form shifted again, weapons emerging from its frame as it targeted and neutralized a series of training dummies with deadly accuracy. A cheer erupted from the crowd as the demonstration concluded. Zephyr could see the hope dawning in their eyes, the realization that with these new tools, their dreams of expansion and reclamation were within reach. The next few months saw a flurry of activity. Under Zephyr's guidance, the robots were put to work expanding the settlement's boundaries. They cleared large swathes of contaminated land, constructed new, fortified structures, and established advanced farming operations that promised to increase food production tenfold. Exploration teams, now accompanied by combat-ready robots, pushed further into the surrounding territories. They began to discover other pockets of survivors, leading to tense but ultimately fruitful negotiations. Slowly but surely, their safe zone began to grow. However, challenges remained. The zombies, ever evolving, began to display new, disturbing behaviors. Scout reports told of zombies that could coordinate attacks, use simple tools, and even set crude traps. The war was far from over. One evening, as Zephyr and Sarah were reviewing maps of their expanded territory, an alarm blared through the settlement. Alex's voice came through the comm system, tension evident in his tone. "Zephyr, Sarah, you need to see this. We've got multiple large hordes converging on our position from different directions. It's like they're mounting a coordinated assault." Zephyr and Sarah exchanged grim looks. Despite their progress, despite their new technologies and expanded defenses, the threat of the zombies loomed larger than ever. "Looks like we'll be putting our new defenses to the test sooner than we thought," Zephyr said, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. Sarah nodded, her face set with determination. "We're ready for them this time. We've come too far to back down now." As they rushed to the command center to coordinate their defense, Zephyr couldn't help but feel a mix of anxiety and exhilaration. This was the moment of truth, the true test of everything they had built. As the first reports of zombie sightings came in, he steeled himself for the battle ahead. The future of this world hung in the balance, and he was determined to tip the scales in humanity's favor. Chapter 7. Uniting Survivors. The coordinated zombie assault had been brutal, testing the limits of their expanded defenses. But thanks to Zephyr's leadership, the advanced technology of the multi-use robots, and the unwavering determination of the survivors, they had emerged victorious once again. The battle, however, made one thing clear. They needed to think bigger. In the aftermath, Zephyr called a meeting with Sarah and the other team leaders. "We can't keep playing defense," he said, his voice firm. "It's time we take the fight to them on a larger scale. But for that, we need more people, more resources." Sarah nodded in agreement. "The scout reports have shown other survivor settlements. If we could unite them—" "Exactly," Zephyr said, a glimmer of excitement in his eyes. "It's time for some diplomacy." Over the next few months, Zephyr led expeditions to the other survivor settlements they had discovered. Each trip was fraught with danger, navigating through zombie-infested territories and dealing with the initial suspicion and fear from other survivors. In one settlement, built in the remains of an old military base, Zephyr faced off against a hardened leader named Colonel Briggs. The colonel was skeptical of Zephyr's claims and hostile to the idea of joining forces. "Why should we trust you?" Briggs demanded, his weathered face etched with suspicion. "We've survived this long on our own." Zephyr met his gaze steadily. "Because together, we can do more than just survive. We can start to reclaim your world. My technology, combined with your military expertise, could turn the tide against the zombies." To demonstrate, Zephyr had brought one of his multi-use robots. As the machine effortlessly cleared rubble, constructed a shelter, and then shifted into combat mode to dispatch a group of zombies that had wandered too close, Zephyr could see the colonel's skepticism beginning to waver. After days of negotiation and demonstration, Briggs finally agreed to an alliance. His people's military training would prove invaluable in the fights to come. Similar scenes played out in other settlements. In a community of scientists holed up in a fortified university campus, Zephyr found eager partners for advancing his technological innovations. A settlement of farmers provided crucial knowledge for expanding their agricultural capabilities. With each successful negotiation, their network grew. Zephyr established secure communication channels between settlements, coordinated resource sharing, and began to implement a unified defense strategy. The once isolated pockets of humanity were becoming a cohesive force. However, uniting the survivors wasn't without its challenges. Old rivalries and disagreements threatened to disrupt their fragile alliance. Zephyr often found himself mediating disputes, drawing on all his diplomatic skills to keep the coalition together. One particularly tense moment came when a dispute over water rights nearly led to armed conflict between two allied settlements. Zephyr, along with Sarah and Alex, rushed to the scene. "We don't have the luxury of fighting among ourselves," Zephyr declared, standing between the two opposing groups. "Every drop of blood we spill fighting each other is a victory for the zombies. We need to focus on our real enemy." His words, backed by a demonstration of water purification technology that could benefit both groups, managed to defuse the situation. But it was a stark reminder of the challenges they faced in uniting a fractured world. As their alliance grew stronger, so did their ability to combat the zombie threat. Coordinated strikes against large hordes became possible, with multi-use robots and trained soldiers working in tandem to clear vast areas. They began to establish safe corridors between settlements, slowly but surely reclaiming territory. Zephyr's reputation grew. To many, he became a symbol of hope, the man from the stars who brought the promise of a better future. But with this admiration came increased responsibility and pressure. Every decision he made could mean life or death for thousands. Late one night, as Zephyr pored over maps and reports in the command center, Sarah found him looking uncharacteristically troubled. "What's on your mind?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. Zephyr sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I never imagined I'd be responsible for so many lives. Every choice I make. The weight of it is overwhelming sometimes." Sarah placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You're not alone in this, Zephyr. We're all in it together. And you've given us something we haven't had in a long time. Hope." Zephyr nodded, grateful for her support. As he looked at the map, showing their expanding safe zones and united settlements, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. They had come so far, but the biggest challenges were yet to come. "You're right," he said, determination returning to his voice. "And we're just getting started. It's time to take this to the next level. We're not just going to survive. We're going to rebuild civilization." As they began to plan their next major operation, Zephyr knew that the road ahead would be difficult. But looking at the united force they had built, the alliances forged, and the territories reclaimed, he allowed himself to feel a glimmer of optimism. Together, they had a real chance of reclaiming this world from the zombie hordes. The real war for the future of this planet was just beginning. Chapter 8. Environmental Restoration. As the United Settlements continued to push back against the zombie threat, Zephyr realized that their long-term survival depended on more than just defending against the undead. The world around them was dying, poisoned by radiation and pollution. If they were to truly reclaim this planet, they needed to heal the land itself. Zephyr gathered a team of the brightest minds from across the settlements, scientists, engineers, and even a few who remembered the world before the apocalypse. Together, they began to formulate a plan for environmental restoration. "The challenge is immense," Dr. Elena Rossi, a former environmental scientist, explained during one of their planning sessions. "We're dealing with widespread radiation chemical contamination, and ecological collapse. It's not something we can fix overnight. Zephyr nodded, his face set with determination. We don't have to fix it overnight. We just need to start and keep pushing forward, one step at a time. The first step was to adapt some of the multi-use robots for environmental cleanup. Zephyr worked tirelessly with the science team to develop new modules for the robots: radiation scrubbers, soil purifiers, and atmospheric cleaners. As the first batch of environmental restoration robots were deployed, the results were modest but encouraging. Pockets of land began to show decreased radiation levels, and soil samples indicated a gradual reduction in toxic elements. But the process was slow, and not without setbacks. In one particularly disheartening incident, a newly cleaned area was recontaminated when a hidden pocket of radioactive material was accidentally unearthed. The setback was a harsh reminder of the long road ahead. Despite the challenges, Zephyr refused to give up. He pushed for the development of more advanced restoration techniques, drawing on the knowledge in his ship's databases and the expertise of the survivors. One breakthrough came in the form of genetically engineered plants, designed to absorb radiation and toxic elements from the soil. These cleansing plants, as they came to be called, were planted in concentric rings around the settlements, slowly expanding the areas of habitable land. Another major advancement was the atmospheric scrubber array. Based on technology from the stellar horizon, these massive structures began to filter the air, gradually reducing the levels of pollutants and radioactive particles in the atmosphere. As months turned into years, the changes became more noticeable. The perpetual haze that had hung over the land began to thin. Patches of healthy vegetation started to appear, tentative at first, then growing with increasing vigor. Wildlife, long absent from many areas, began to return. The transformations weren't limited to the natural world. As the environment improved, so did the quality of life for the survivors. Fresh, uncontaminated food became more plentiful. The incidence of radiation sickness and other environmental illnesses decreased. People began to spend more time outdoors, reconnecting with a world they had long feared. One sunny afternoon, 5 years into the restoration efforts, Zephyr stood with Sarah on a hilltop overlooking one of their largest settlements. The view was a stark contrast to what he had seen when he first arrived on this planet. Green fields stretched out before them, punctuated by the gleam of solar panels and the gentle rotation of wind turbines. In the distance, a herd of deer grazed peacefully, untroubled by the distant figures of patrol robots. "It's beautiful," Sarah said, her voice filled with wonder. "I never thought I'd see anything like this again." Zephyr nodded, a sense of pride and accomplishment washing over him. "We've come a long way, but we've still got a long way to go." Indeed, despite their progress, challenges remained. Large swathes of the planet were still uninhabitable, and the zombie threat, while diminished, was far from eradicated. The undead seemed to be evolving in response to the changing environment, becoming more resilient and adapting to the restored ecosystems. Moreover, as the land healed, new conflicts arose among the human population. Disputes over the newly viable territories threatened to fracture the alliances Zephyr had worked so hard to build. As they made their way back to the settlement, Zephyr's mind was already racing with plans and strategies. They needed to accelerate their restoration efforts, find new ways to combat the evolving zombies, and somehow keep the fragile human alliance intact. The fate of this world still hung in the balance, but for the first time in decades, the scales were tipping in favor of life, of recovery, of hope. Zephyr, once an accidental visitor to this ravaged planet, had become its most ardent champion, and he was more determined than ever to see its restoration through to the end. As night fell and the stars came out, clearer now than they had been in years, Zephyr looked up at the unfamiliar constellations. Somewhere out there was his home, still lost to him. But here, on this healing world, he had found a new purpose, a new home, and he wouldn't have it any other way. Chapter 9. A New Society. As the environment continued to heal and the immediate threat of extinction receded, the United Settlements faced a new challenge: how to govern themselves in this new world. The loosely allied groups that had formed during the crisis were no longer sufficient for a growing, stabilizing population. Zephyr, aware of the historical pitfalls of power concentration, knew that this was a crucial moment. The decisions made now would shape the future of this world for generations to come. "We need a system that represents all of us," Zephyr announced during a gathering of settlement leaders. "A government that is accountable to the people, that can adapt to our unique challenges, and that ensures no one person or group holds too much power." The idea was met with mixed reactions. Some, like Sarah, eagerly embraced the concept of democratic governance. Others, particularly those who had held positions of authority in the old alliance system, were more hesitant. Colonel Briggs, his face etched with concern, voiced his reservations. "Democracy is all well and good, Zephyr, but we're still at war. The zombies might be fewer, but they're smarter, more dangerous. Can we afford the luxury of debate when quick decisions could mean life or death?" Zephyr nodded, acknowledging the concern. "That's why we need to create a system that can be both responsive and responsible. We'll have mechanisms for rapid decision-making in emergencies, but with checks and balances to prevent abuse." Over the next several months, Zephyr worked tirelessly with representatives from all settlements to draft a constitution for their new nation. Drawing from his knowledge of various governmental systems and adapting them to their unique situation, they created a framework for a democratic republic. The document established a legislative body with representatives from each settlement, an executive branch led by an elected president, and a judicial system to interpret and uphold the laws. It also included special provisions for dealing with the ongoing zombie threat and environmental restoration efforts. When the Constitution was finally put to a vote, it passed with an overwhelming majority. The people, tired of merely surviving, were ready to start living again, to have a say in their future. To no one's surprise, Zephyr was elected as the first president of the new nation. Despite his initial reluctance, he was, after all, not native to this world. He accepted the role, seeing it as a continuation of his mission to help this planet recover. Zephyr's first term as president was a whirlwind of activity. He worked to establish the new governmental institutions, mediate disputes between settlements, and continue the push for environmental restoration and zombie eradication. One of his first acts was to create a scientific advisory board, ensuring that policy decisions would be informed by the best available knowledge. He also established a civil defense force, separate from the military, to handle zombie incursions and other emergencies. But governing proved to be a different challenge than leading during a crisis. Zephyr found himself navigating complex political waters, balancing the needs and wants of different factions. He faced criticism and opposition, something he hadn't experienced much of when everyone was focused solely on survival. A particularly contentious issue arose around the distribution of restored land. Some argued for equal distribution among all citizens, while others pushed for prioritizing those with agricultural expertise. The debate raged for weeks, threatening to split the fragile new nation. Zephyr, drawing on his diplomatic skills, managed to broker a compromise. A portion of the land would be distributed equally, while another portion would be allocated based on ability to productively farm it. The solution wasn't perfect, but it was accepted, and it set a precedent for resolving future disputes. As his 4-year term neared its end, Zephyr found himself at a crossroads. He had promised himself and the people that he would only serve one term, to set a precedent against entrenchment of power. But there was still so much to do. In a televised address to the nation, the first of its kind since the apocalypse, Zephyr announced his decision not to seek re-election. "I came to your world as a stranger," he said, his voice carrying to every settlement. "You took me in, trusted me, followed me as we fought back against extinction. Together, we've built something remarkable. But the time has come for me to step aside, to let new leaders emerge. Our democracy must be bigger than any one person." The announcement was met with a mix of understanding and dismay. Many had come to see Zephyr as the foundation of their new society. But as the election to choose his successor got underway, there was also a sense of excitement. For the first time in living memory, the people had a real choice in their leadership. As Zephyr prepared to leave office, he looked out over the capital city that had grown up around the stellar horizon. The ship, once his only link to home, now stood as a museum and research center, a symbol of how far they had come. He felt a mix of emotions: pride in what they had accomplished, hope for the future, and a touch of uncertainty about his own path forward. But as he watched citizens passionately debating the merits of the candidates vying to succeed him, Zephyr knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, this world and its people would face them together, as a united, democratic nation. The adventure that had begun with a lost traveler crash-landing on a zombie-infested world had transformed into something far greater. It had become the story of a world reborn, of humanity's resilience, and of the power of hope in the face of overwhelming odds. And though his term as president was ending, Zephyr knew that in many ways, the real work of building this new world was just beginning. Chapter 10. Epilogue. A Century of Progress. The sun rose over a world transformed. Gone were the desolate wastelands and ruined cities that had greeted Zephyr when he first crash-landed on this planet. In their place stood gleaming metropolises, verdant forests, and rolling fields of golden grain. A century had passed since the arrival of the space traveler, and the planet had undergone a remarkable metamorphosis. In the heart of the capital city, now a sprawling urban center of several hundreds of thousands of inhabitants, stood the Zephyr Kane Memorial Museum. Once the stellar horizon, Zephyr's faithful ship, it now housed exhibits detailing the planet's journey from post-apocalyptic wasteland to thriving civilization. On this particular morning, an elderly woman named Lyra made her way through the museum's halls. Her steps were slow but purposeful, her eyes bright with intelligence despite her advanced years. As she passed the various exhibits, a small smile played on her lips, memories flooding back with each artifact she saw. Lyra paused before a holographic display showing the first multi-use robots Zephyr had created. She chuckled softly, remembering her father's stories about how revolutionary these machines had been in their time. Now, of course, they seemed quaint compared to the advanced AI systems that helped manage every aspect of their society. Moving on, she came to a section dedicated to the environmental restoration efforts. The before and after images were stark. Barren, irradiated wastelands transformed into lush, living ecosystems. Lyra's smile widened as she recalled her own role in these efforts. As a young environmental scientist, she had helped develop the third generation of cleansing plants, which had accelerated the detoxification of the planet's soil and water. The next exhibit showcased the evolution of their society's governance. Pictures of past presidents lined the wall, starting with Zephyr himself. Lyra's eyes lingered on his image. Though she had been born years after his presidency, Zephyr's influence had shaped every aspect of her life and the world she grew up in. As she continued her tour, Lyra overheard a tour guide speaking to a group of school children. "And here," the guide was saying, gesturing to a map, "you can see how our nation expanded over the first 50 years. By working together and using the technologies developed by President Kane and his successors, our ancestors were able to reclaim most of the habitable landmass within 5 decades. One of the children raised her hand. What about the zombies? Are they all gone now? The guide smiled. An excellent question. The last confirmed zombie sighting was over 30 years ago. Thanks to the tireless efforts of our scientists and defense forces, the zombie threat was gradually eliminated. However, we maintain constant vigilance, with monitoring systems across the planet to detect any potential resurgence. Lyra nodded to herself, remembering the celebrations when the last zombie had been officially declared neutralized. It had marked the end of an era, the closing of a chapter in their planet's history. As she neared the end of the exhibit, Lyra found herself before a life-sized hologram of Zephyr Kane. The hologram smiled warmly, inviting visitors to ask questions about his life and experiences. Lyra hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "Zephyr," she said softly, "did you ever regret not finding a way back to your home planet?" The hologram's expression turned thoughtful. "In my early years here, I often dreamed of finding a way home. But as time passed, I realized that home isn't just where you come from. It's where you choose to invest your heart and efforts. This world and its people became my home. My only regret would have been not doing everything in my power to help it heal and thrive." Lyra nodded, a tear forming in the corner of her eye. She had heard similar sentiments from her grandmother, Sarah, who had known the real Zephyr. As she exited the museum, Lyra stepped out onto a bustling street. Flying vehicles zipped overhead, while pedestrians of all ages walked along tree-lined paths. In a nearby park, children played, their laughter carrying on the clean, fresh air. Lyra made her way to a small cafe across from the museum. As she sipped her tea, she gazed out at the vibrant city around her. A century ago, all of this had been nothing more than a desperate dream in the minds of a few survivors and one lost space traveler. Now, their civilization was reaching for the stars. The previous week's news had been dominated by the successful launch of their 5th interstellar probe. Somewhere out there was Zephyr's homeworld, and perhaps one day they would find it. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the city, Lyra couldn't help but feel a profound sense of gratitude. For Zephyr, for all those who had worked tirelessly to rebuild their world, and for the unbreakable spirit of hope that had carried them through their darkest times. The adventure that had begun with a lone space traveler crash-landing on a zombie-infested planet had blossomed into the story of an entire world's rebirth. And though the path had been long and fraught with challenges, the results were nothing short of miraculous. Lyra raised her cup in a silent toast to the past they had overcome, the present they had built, and the future that stretched endlessly before them. The legacy of Zephyr Kane lived on, not just in museums and history books, but in the thriving world around her and the limitless potential of the generations to come.